Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us here at Cloud Wars Live, where we explore customer-centric business innovation by speaking with the dynamic companies and people making and using the modern technologies that profoundly change how the world works, lives, plays, learns, and dreams. Our guest on today's show is serial entrepreneur, scientist, scholar, and philosopher Joe Stafura, whose latest launch is Thrive Inc., an interactive platform that helps optimize performance and outcomes by helping people understand how and when they're at their best. Joe, welcome to Cloud Wars Live, and thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me, Bob. It's great to be here, and I'm delighted to spend the time here with you today talking about my favorite subject.
Joe, I know that folks are going to want to hear about what you're doing with Thrive, but to help everybody understand that in the right perspective, would you please set the stage for us a little? Tell us about your background, from NASA and other places, and how you've woven multiple disciplines and experiences into, your latest entrepreneurial adventure.
I'll try to be brief. When you live a long time and fortunate enough to do the things that I've been able to stumble into, there's a lot to talk about. So, it started a long time ago when I was studying digital electronics and engineering in the 70s, and there wasn't a lot of interest in it at that time. It wasn't a main industry. Electronics was just coming onto the scene. So studying that was sort of an oddball trait, believe it or not, at that time. And what happened to me was, fortunately, NASA needed people to staff its manned spaceflight network, and they were allowing people who hadn't finished college yet to take tests and see if they could qualify for a position, and I did that. So I was fortunate enough to qualify, and I worked for NASA through a series of great projects that could take up a podcast in themselves, each one of them. Skylab, famous manned space lab that's now been carried on by the International Space Station. And then moved on to the most incredible device ever put in the sky at the time, ATS-6, which laid the groundwork for everything from high-quality satellite television to GPS systems to all sorts of data relay systems that allow banking institutions to do the kind of things they do, et cetera. I moved from there back to Pittsburgh and joined the company that made equipment that I was using at NASA called Contravi's Gertz. Worked for them for a little while and moved into the newspaper business.
Well, of course. It's a straight line, right?
Right, a straight line in the newspaper business. And I talked to people. It was the technology lily pad that I hopped across, because the publishing industry was rapidly adopting the same computer systems that I had been using at NASA. So I jumped into a well-known area for me and a brand new area for them. So I was lucky to be the one-eyed man in the land of the blind. We had it was a privately owned newspaper business in the 80s, which were very lucrative businesses at those times. They had taken huge technological advantages and had no price pressures. So their margins grew, and the group I worked with invested heavily in laser typesetting and networking, and then ultimately desktop publishing, which laid the foundation for my big idea, which was using digital photography in the workflow system of a production commercial printing plant. I couldn't get anyone in that area. The newspaper wasn't interested in investing in that kind of thing. So I came to Pittsburgh and found an advertising agency that backed me with about $500,000, and we bought cameras, actually converted PAL video cameras, and then started to really take advantage of the growing networking capabilities. Ethernet was winning then. Novell was still around, but was fading away. But we were going from 1 megabit to 10 megabit to 100 megabit to 1 gigabit. It seemed like every 6 months, So yeah, it was really exciting to see what you could do. So we tied the advertising agency invested. We did very well with Service-Star True Value. We're able to triple the amount of shots we can do in a day, plus eliminate all chemicals, films. So it was really a complete digital transformation of a workflow. Kind of stunning, really, to see, because you really learn that not only are things added to the economic force, things are deducted. You subtract things, as Kodak found out very painfully.
Yes.
When these changes happen. With that company in place, something came back from my NASA days, which was DARPANET back then, and became the Ethernet as it wandered into the public domain. We started a division of our organization because fundamentally the skill sets were the same. The media is all that changed. These were graphic designers and communicators and people who knew how to build media vehicles. And this was just another one. So we moved over to that, and in really short order, within about 18 months, had been done websites for almost every significant company in Pittsburgh at the time. Alcoa, Federated Investors, Mellon Bank at the time, before BNY Mellon, PNC, and started to look outside of the area for some interest, and ran into a group in California, out of Silicon Valley, called US Web, that was executing a roll-up, and they come out, saw our company, really liked it, and within 10 months had bought the group. So we spent some time with those guys, had an event I had never been through before, which was going public. That gave us a chance to see how you could spread the wealth throughout the organization. Everyone in our company had shares and could take advantage of our success. Yeah. And that was a great ride until it wasn't, right around 2000, 2001. The reality of a lot of the business models came home. You find out through these tumultuous times, when it seems like everything would work, that not everything works. And as those things come to light, what emerges out of the end is what we've seen over the last 10 years, 15 years, which is a powerful internet that is still taking over almost everything that we do, only in, I'd say, much more professional and defined manners. My time from 2000, when I left US Web, up to the current, has been specifically spent in AI-type technologies. A text-to-speech company. I worked for about a year and a half with a speech recognition company. All those things doing computer-like things that were human domains in the past, So that's what I started to think of as AI. What can this computer do that people do, and what could it do cheaper and better? That was the main push of AI, was to understand, how you can automate and accelerate things. I would say about 2010, I started to think differently about the combination of technology and people, and morphed my thinking about AI into something that fits more into ancillary or auxiliary intelligence, and thought about the way that the human machine partnership could really achieve new heights in this century, and could approach some of the intractable problems of the past, or being worked on, but still have a significant amount of ways to go in this century, until everybody thinks we have them solved. So that was the genesis of Thrive. The idea was, let's take some modern technologies across communications, artificial intelligence, and cloud-based computing, and build a place where people could have conversations about things that are important to them in their lives. And they have the advantage of the technology to assist them as they encounter the things that modern neuroscience and behavioral economics have taught us get in the way of us making good decisions and having clear perspectives. We like to say at Thrive, our mission is to give people better days. And the way to get those better days, we think, is to provide higher understanding of your situation, the options that are available, and the decisions and actions that you need to make to achieve the goals that you desire.
Joe, you've sounds like, your journey's taking you from outer space to inner space.
I never thought about it that way, Bob, but I think you're absolutely right. Just like Richard Feynman said in one of his lectures, there's a lot of room at the bottom. As I spent a lot of time, early on, as you said, looking at out in the space, I spent hours and nights, staring into the skies. And you're right. It's much more interesting to me now to stare inside of myself and wonder why I would make this decision or that decision, or try to understand the individual motivations in the moment that lead people to do things that are somewhat counterproductive. And then on the positive side, what are the things that allow certain people to just be able to put the pieces into place so effectively, and accomplish and achieve what it is they set out to do. And a lot of cases, you find out these are people that have consciously or subconsciously adapted their behaviors and habits to counteract the things that could get in their way.
Joe, I think the one thing about Thrive, from when you and I had first talked about it, and as Thrive has evolved, there, it was that basic thing that I think appeals to everybody, which is that, as you put it a minute ago, understanding ourselves better, so that we know when is the time to sort of kick it into high gear and when's the time to back off a little bit. So, right, it sounds so simple, but why was there a need for Thrive when this seems like something that everybody would want to do and already have taken care of?
That's a great point. And I tell people sometimes when they ask what we do, and the better day seems a little bit too pithy, that we spend a lot of time learning how to help people do the things that they know they should do, but don't. And that, I
Yeah.
find that fascinating too, because sometimes, the reason that they don't is actually a subconscious block or belief. For example, we worked with a client in engineering, heavy, high level nuclear engineering, and they had been running a program for over 2 years, really, that was designed fundamentally to help them improve their engineering efforts, shorten schedules, and be safer. But interestingly enough, that they weren't getting good data, and the first thing we did when the company gave us a chance to interact with the individuals with Thrive was find out none of them believed that this program provided them any benefit.
Ah,
They
yeah.
believed that it was strictly an exercise to fill out a company's compliance or reporting requirements. So even though that's certainly important, it wasn't important at the engineering level. They didn't understand how that helped them do their job better. What we really found to break through that was really something that was available and anyone could have found it, but they just didn't pay attention or connect the dots. When we reminded these individuals that the people who put these programs together were just like them. They were engineers that were trying to do better jobs. They were engineers that were trying to meet schedules. They were engineers that were trying to be safer. That moved the needle, Bob, in 1 month from 0% of the engineers who believed that this program was beneficial to them to 91%
Wow. In a month.
in a month. And it was just that one major blocker had built such a resistance to the idea that nobody saw the self-benefit. And it does get down to a fundamental theory of intentions to actions and what can get in the way of someone's intentions. Like you said, we were talking about earlier, the things that we know we should do, and the fact that they don't do it. And at the simplest level, we believe in workplaces and even in some health considerations we work with, it's a combination of confidence and self-interest. There has to be a confidence that the individual has that they can perform the action correctly and confidently. And on the other side, there does have to be a sufficient sense that if I do this, my life will be better. The situation that will be improved, or my goal will be closer to being achieved. So we spend a lot of time looking for those blockers, we call them, between what people say they will do or what they'll train to do and what the actions they actually take in the moment.
Joe, I hope you'll forgive me. I know when we had lunch recently, I mentioned this quick anecdote to you, but there's a point to it, I promise. So, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago, I was working in a media company, and a pretty successful publisher there from the magazines said, hey, I've been watching on television now, there's all these evening magazine shows now where they take the standard 30-minute format instead of being chopped up by lots of little individual news segments. They said, we're going to talk about one thing for 30 minutes, a big topic. So he said, I want to do one of these for the tech industry. And he started doing some focus groups around the country, and he had done 4 or 5, and he was going to do one in New York. And he popped his head in my office and he said, hey, I'm having a little trouble figure out, what the feedback is on these things. Would you come to the focus group tonight? So I said, sure. And I'm sitting in there as things starts. I'm watching. He's asking him 30 minutes or 60, black and white or color, beta or VHS, commercial at the end or middle, and all these things. And I wrote down a note and I handed it to somebody who took it in the room and gave him the note. And he looked at it and he read it and he asked the question to the focus group. He said, will any of you watch this? And they all said, no. And he said, why didn't you tell me? And they said, you didn't ask. So we have these things so often. And, when you were talking about blockers, and very often it is, the guy didn't want to create a product that nobody cared about, but the blocker in his head was, I see that there's some success over here in some dimension. I'm going to take that idea and put it here. And he was just assuming that, certain things that were not so. And I think, Joe, from some of what you've talked to me about Thrive and some of what I've read about it, it is one of those things that help clear out some of that fog or fuzz or disinformation or purely wrong information between us and what we really want to achieve, and a feedback loop, right? That
Right.
allows people to see more clearly, here's where I am, here's what I want to do, here's my self-interest. And this device, this feedback loop is going to help me be more on the ball more of the time and more in sync with what I really want to achieve. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, I think it is. And you know, one of the things that that feedback drives within our clients is self-awareness, increased self-awareness. And awareness that we're looking for is frankly context. Because, you know, like you said, when you see an idea and you transplant it to a different spot, it's not the same because the context is different. So at that point, now you have an integration, not just a movement. It's not like putting something on a shelf. These things interact and they live together. So understanding the context of the situation really for us is almost a starting point from whenever we start working with our clients to do the things that they look for us to do, which is, you know, pretty traditional stuff. Improve sales, increase compliance, increase customer satisfaction, assess customer satisfaction and see what would make them happier. So when you take a look at any of those activities, the first thing you have to understand is the context that those individuals are living in, so that you begin to give an idea of what it is that would make their life better. You know, if the guy's in a context of falling off of a cliff, then a rope is the most important thing in the world to him. You know, but if he's sitting in a restaurant, it doesn't help him, right? I mean, so, so
Yeah.
that's kind of a crude representation, but you get the ideas.
Yeah.
Just like the tools, like the rope, we have cognitive tools and abilities, and knowing which of the tools to pull out at the right time is really important. It goes into something we adhere to pretty closely and have really for the almost half a decade. We've really been looking at that, is the idea of mental models and how you set a perspective and understanding of the situation. Charlie Munger is probably most famous for promoting these things. He's written some publications and he talks about them quite often in his speeches. And he views his mental models like his Swiss Army knife. When he sees himself in a situation, he's gotten to the point where his first habit is to try to match a mental model to that context, to that problem set that gives him the best shot of understanding what the situation is, what the options are, and how he can do them.
Joe, you know, the mental models, the types of thing you're talking about, you know, and we laughed a little bit about your trek from outer space to inner space. But I was thinking as you're describing these mental models, and again, I hope that most people feel, you know, every day I want to get up, I want to have a good day, I want to have more good moments, I want to understand the ways of thinking and the ways of behaving that are going to optimize my chances of having that really good day for me and everything I do. But I thought of something that, you know, in my time at Oracle, and I had a chance to spend quite a bit of time with Larry Ellison, who's one of the most remarkable people, perhaps the most remarkable person I've ever met, and his range of understanding and intellect and exploration to all sorts of things is remarkable. And he really loved to study the human brain and, you know, why we do what we do. One time he said, I don't know that everybody understands. He said, the primary function of the human brain is deception. And he said, the primary target of that deception is ourselves.
Right.
And now say that that's partly right even. So it's not just that we go into it with a blank slate and not fully knowing what are these combinations of things we have to put together to get these idealized outcomes. But we almost start with, you know, if this self-deception is also in the mix there, Joe, then it's even yet more difficult to get to that idealized state.
That's right. The idea around the mental models, again, is to do something that none of us likes to believe we really need to learn how to do better, weirdly enough, which is thinking. And the paradox is that, you know, the more education you have, the less you think you need to really understand critical thinking. And I see no correlation there. No correlation, honestly. I mean, academic learning is academic learning, but being self-aware and integrating important facts into your models, because as you said, Bob, we don't start with a blank slate. We're always anchored. We're always anchored to our previous states.
Yeah.
We are a state machine as we go through life, and our state changes due to inputs and outputs and events. just like any a finite state model, which is fundamentally why we've built Thrive as a finite state model, so that it could create a mirror-like interaction with a human being. That idea of being anchored means that all you know and all your opinions are rooted in things that have happened to you previously and the experiences that you've had there. And that's what can make decision making so difficult, because as Mr. Ellison said, we like to deceive ourselves. So we'll go through the easy way of taking a look at something and saying, wow, this looks kind of like this, so I'm just going to do this over here and everything will be fine, with no consideration of critical thinking. And by that, I mean, discovery of ground truths, second order thinking. These are things that are well understood in areas like philosophy and some of those areas, but they're really becoming more and more important as fundamental tools, so that we can do things like maintaining an open mindset long enough so that you have all the facts that you need for the next decision, knowing how to converge down into, a rational, valid solution. So validating assumptions. Those kind of things are really hard to teach in a classroom setting, but they're relatively easy to insert to an individual over time if they'll involve themselves in an ongoing interval learning process, for example. If they'll just touch it now and then, you gain a little bit all the time. There's a cognitive principle. Actually, the first cognitive psychological principle was the Eberhaus curve, created by Hermann Eberhaus. Like scientists had to do back in the days for about 25 years, he would learn 5 words, like on 10 words on Monday, and then on Friday, see how many he remembered. Then see how many he remembered on the following Friday. And he developed a curve of how quickly we lose information. When you do that for 35 years, you get some pretty acute insights.
That's a little scary.
Well, I tell you what, I met a real life version of that. Excuse my non sequitur here. You can pull this out if you want. But there was when I lived in Barstow, California, and I worked a lot at night, so I spent a lot of time roaming around. And one of the individuals that I met out there was the world's leading observer of variable stars.
Wow.
Variable stars are stars that have a magnitude that fluctuates over time, cyclically and periodically. So this individual had sat in the desert for 40 years, went out every single night, got behind a telescope, which was not glamorous. This was a plywood box and a hand grind mirror, but it was good enough, and he had reams of books, and he'd look at the same stars and go, oh, that one's a little brighter, that one's a little dimmer, and he had decades of that. So it's the only person I could compare to Eberhaus that I've met in person who was so singularly focused and spent so much of their life basically learning one thing really, really well.
Wow. Joe, let me ask now, what you were just describing, but the finite states and so on like that. A few minutes ago, you had said that one of the various ways that Thrive can help a company is increase sales, compliance, customer satisfaction, I think you said. So say, I'm in a very competitive business and I need to help my sales organization get more competitive, be more successful. I come to you, in a fairly simple way. How can you help the sales team be more successful?
What we've been doing with quite a few groups is using the platform to assess all the way through to the customer. And what we mean by that is we start a conversation back at the selling side of what the selling proposition is. And we follow that through, in most cases, honestly, to the reseller. And then we see the reseller slightly reshaping that proposition in a way where it finally hits the customer. And then we see the customer receiving that information that's a little bit different than what the individual had thought they launched from the organization. So what we do is align that thinking and language, and at times point out that what seems to be very well understood at the shippers, the manufacturing side or the production side, is really not understood at all by the customer, because it's been distorted through the channels and through the expectations of other individuals involved, the reseller. In some cases, these products require maintenance and support of specialists. Those folks all come into play. And what we really do with our customers is help them understand what people like about their product, what they dislike about their product, and how they're really seeing their product and what's important to them as opposed to the individual who's creating it, which is often quite a bit of difference. early on. What a inventor thinks they're providing to society often turns out to be quite different, and there's
Yeah.
tons of historical precedents on people that thought they were doing one thing and wound up doing something else.
Well, Joe, and that thing of what you said early on about, you help people understand themselves better, and then the more people are able to do that, and there's a cliche here, but stay on task, be tied to what the overall goal is, those sorts of things. I was thinking of that, whether you see it as a bumper sticker, a t-shirt, sometimes, sort of the antithesis of it. But I think too many people are caught up in this situation where the solution is the beatings will continue until morale improves.
Yep.
Right. There's a better way, right, Joe? Please.
Yeah, there's a better way for sure, because we really see, one of the things Gallup has been running for a long time is engagement surveys across companies. And they're almost always 30%, been 30% in the US for a long time. So they're really, they're telling you who's engaged, but what they're really not measuring there is what they're engaged in. Most importantly, why are 70% disengaged? What's missing out of an environment or context that lets an individual feel like they're doing something with meaning and purpose? I believe that meaning and purpose have been obscured often in modern business models. And one of the things that we really hope that Thrive can do is provide more clarity and, frankly, more sunshine all through businesses, organizations, to the customer level. So there's a higher level of trust between providers and consumers. I think that within the individual basis, the important thing for them is to feel that they're connected to helping that customer. Everyone in the company has to feel that they're helping someone for a company to actually achieve the highest level of operation. And we know that that's because we like to call it Thrive. The super emotion, gratitude, is one of the prime drivers that will get an individual to continually repeat an action. If they understand that people are grateful that they're repeating that action. So connecting that customer gratitude back through our feedback that originally starts with us sending out things that people feel look like surveys a little bit up front. We hope ours are a little more fun and entertaining. We try to color them up. But, regardless, we're building a baseline of understanding, setting up the context, and seeing if we can't dig out what it is that's making people unhappy within the organization. We've seen things like Semmelweis effect, another cognitive bias we deal with, which fundamentally means that you're making today's decisions based on yesterday's facts.
Yeah.
We've seen that pop up in a lot of companies, where they get very comfortable. And often the weird thing is that the company can be achieving pretty good quarterly results at that point, but the underpinnings are already starting to erode because someone else out there has something that's a little better, maybe a little cheaper, and is starting to get a little more interesting, and they're going to suck that business out of their channel pretty quick if they don't have a way of anticipating that. Self-cannibalization, we know through the IT businesses, companies, Bob, that you've seen that have been willing to do it survive. And companies you've seen that haven't done it, I'll name most prominent in my life was probably DEC, the Digital Equipment Corporation, just missed the boat entirely and see the change whatsoever. Kodak also was curiously blind. And I think maybe locked in by something we call loss aversion too. You got a big investment into something, you want to believe it's really working. So you'll tell yourself it's working for a long time after it stops working.
Yeah. What do you mean I'm dead? I'm standing right here in front of you.
Yeah, and that's the kind of thing that are the biases that we're really not well equipped as human beings to recognize those things. So part of what we do with Thrive, when we say we're ancillary or auxiliary intelligence, is to provide cues to people to be aware of when an anchoring problem may be distorting their decisions on what something should cost or how long something should take. When a Semmelweis effect is maybe directing them to think about things that aren't relevant in their customers' minds today. And to help people understand that respect is a lubricant to get communication so that companies can stop worrying about breaking down silos and start understanding why they form in the first place and just ensuring they don't.
Yeah.
So these are the kind of things modern tools do that I'd say legacy lagging indicator driven tools don't do. When we say we're leading indicator tools, we mean that we start at the thought. by understanding what people are thinking. And from there, knowing the context and knowing the possibilities, we have a pretty good idea of being able to tell you what the probability of the desired actions are.
Joe, I love that. And I got to say, it's a little bit of ancient history here I'm going to get into, but you mentioned the company Digital Equipment Corporation, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they were all of a sudden found themselves strangers in a strange land, right? They were outgunned, behind the times, all those things. What I find, and hey, that's happened to a lot of companies, but what I've always found most striking about the Digital Equipment Corp example was they had been the disruptor just a handful of years before, right? When they came in with the mini computer and totally tipped IBM's world upside down, something that everybody said couldn't be done. So they had it very much in their initial DNA to be the disruptor, to look at things as they were and say, no, we're going to shift it. Yet all those things you've talked about, what do you call them? The anchor problems or anchoring problems?
Loss aversion, anchoring,
Yeah, they felt, okay, now we're in a new world with new rules and we're on top and this is how it's going to be. And they didn't see that, no, what they did was help trigger this cascading, ongoing series of disruptions where nothing stays the same. Everything's going to be moving all the time. And if you're not changing yourself dramatically, somebody's going to do to you what you were smart enough and clever enough and aggressive enough to do to somebody else. So, and it can't just be that they thought, well, hey, we'll have fun for 10 years and then we're going to get blown up and there's nothing we can do about it. There had to be a fair amount of delusion.
Yeah. I think there's no doubt about that, because to your point, even early in my career at NASA, Bob, we were putting in deck PDP 20s, 44s, 70s, and taking out Univacs and IBM machines, That was the switch. You're right. They blew right in there. Why? They had a better, more flexible machine, a higher power and a smaller footprint. That disrupting technology is interesting because you get someone who really draws a bead on something like a mini computer market. You can really start to get a pretty good leg up, as IBM and the rest of those guys did, to eat into that market pretty quickly. We really don't see ourselves, again, at Thrive, we don't see ourselves disrupting technology. We see ourselves disruptive technology, disrupting, frankly, a $500 billion US spend in coaching, consulting, and training. Those are services that are needed and have been needed for companies to do all kinds of things, transitions and change management and different types of Six Sigma, et cetera. Consultants come in and made your companies better. But in today's knowledge companies, we're driving off of the belief that most of the intelligence that's needed for that company to work better already exists in the four walls. It's just not connected and configured properly. And that's what we work with companies, is to allow them to understand what they really know, evaluate what they should forget, keep what they should keep, and put it into a program that reinforces that concept all through the organization and increasingly through what we call the ecosystem, which is a little different than a value chain, I think, in a sense where value chains tend to kind of stay in place for a while, where ecosystems can almost turn on and off in relatively short periods. When certain resources are needed by an ecosystem partner, you can integrate them in through an API into your ecosystem and get the advantages of that. And when you don't need them anymore or something else is different, you can turn that off. Exactly what parts of the $500 billion market we're going to disrupt, I don't know. I think optimistically there's 40% of it or so that's in the capabilities that we have now, in the sense that people really don't want consultants, trainers, or coaches. What they want are outcomes. They want people to behave a certain way and to make decisions in a certain sense. And that's really what they want. So just like back when I was explaining to people, you don't want the chemistry in the film. What you want is this picture on news stock as beautiful as you can, economically as you can. Yeah. So companies, you don't really want more people to manage. You don't really want to go through another quasi-hiring project. What you really want to do is get maximum input and engagement from the individuals within your organization. I say four walls, which is another indication of my age, but it could be a zillion walls or no walls at all nowadays. The fact is you're connected. Interesting, companies are connected cognitively now more than they are physically, right? That also shifts the importance to what people think about the organization and what they imagine the organization is supposed to do is much more ephemeral than it was when you walked into a place in a U.S. Steel jacket through a U.S. Steel gate with U.S. Steel signals all over the place, or Alcoa signals all over the place, or even Oracle or Microsoft signals all over the place.
Yeah.
You don't have those kind of in-your-face symbolism. And symbols are ancient, they're older than language, so they are super impactful. I think it's a little bit of a gap right now for organizations to understand exactly how to get that same level of impact being a not in your face company. Because the companies that have grown that way recently, like Facebook, they are in your face company. But most aren't anymore, and they tend to operate differently. So to build that brand within your organization is harder than ever, I think.
Joe, I want to ask you one last question, but before I do, please, anybody's interested, where can folks find out more about Thrive?
Well, you can learn just about everything about us at our website at www.gothrive.io. That's .io.
And Go Thrive.
Go Thrive.
All right.
As a website, we have white papers on there. We have a little demo, and we have a couple case studies to give you an idea of what we do in practical terms.
All right, Joe. So for a closer, just a simple, lightweight question here. So AI, are you an optimist?
Yes.
Because I know you've seen the dark sides of it as well. But what gives you cause for optimism?
Well, it's my nature. I always look on the bright side. But I also read plenty of Karl Popper, so I know the dangers of ignoring the dangers. I think that while there are definitely legitimate concerns over the overreach of AI and people doing bad things with it, that's not anything particularly new. I think that we have some time here based off the capabilities and what's available now that we can still drive to make AI a human-centric technology, not a human-displacing technology. I don't believe that computers are going to be making any big decisions anytime soon, but I love the fact that AI can help them make a lot of little decisions more accurately. Repetitive tasks, no matter how smart you are, it detaches from intelligence. That's why surgeons and pilots use checklists, right? I mean, they do this thousands and thousands of times, but they've identified the human flaw in those repetitive habits when you're not sure if you really did it today or you did it yesterday, when you try to use memory. So I think AI has a lot of places where it can be completely beneficial. I think if we stay diligent and we develop the right kind of tools, once again, we can prevent it from killing us, taking us over, or eliminating every single job to where we're all sitting around wondering who's making the money and who's spending anything.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, Joe, along with that, I loved your thoughts about, some corollaries or alternatives to what AI means. You talked about ancillary intelligence and auxiliary intelligence. And I think that ties right in there with your optimistic answer. And I share that outlook with you. But Joe, overall, thank you so much. This has really been a great conversation. And thanks a million for your time and insights.
Well, thanks again for inviting me, Bob. It's great to talk to you always. And best of luck. Hope to talk to you soon.
Hey, and many thanks to all of you listeners for joining us here on Cloud Wars Live, where we explore the unfolding adventures of digital transformation and cloud computing and how those are profoundly changing how we live, work, play, learn, and experience the world. I hope you'll join us for other episodes of Cloud Wars Live, and please share your feedback with me at bobevanspa@gmail.com. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.